to the system. I am an architect. Where others see problems, I see the system. A decision has been made, action has begun, the task appears to be complete. The system thinks it's working. But in reality, no one knows what has actually changed. A campaign is launched, views increase, sales remain the same, and automation is implemented. Processing time is reduced, but the number of errors rises. A customer case is closed, but the same problem resurfaces. People think the application has failed. Sometimes they're wrong. The problem isn't failure. The problem is that success has never been defined. In logs 20, we established the path for our decision to become reality. We made the action, the person responsible, the dependencies, and the proof of completion visible. However, the completion of a process does not mean it has achieved its purpose. A system can execute a command correctly, yet produce the wrong result. Because execution and impact are not the same thing, a message may have been sent, but it may not have been understood. A product may have been delivered, but the need may not have been met. A new process may have been implemented, but instead of reducing people's workload, it may have simply shifted it elsewhere. That is why the architect asks one more question after saying completed. Did it work? This question seems simple, but most systems cannot answer it, because a system records what it did. Over time, it forgets why it did it. It knows how many messages were sent. It doesn't know how many people received the correct answer. It knows how many tasks were closed. It doesn't know how many problems were actually resolved. It knows how many processes were accelerated. It doesn't know how that speed affected trust, quality, or cost. This is how an echoless system is formed. Action goes out, but the echo of the result does not come back. The system mistakes its own movement for success. People look at the numbers. Graphs rise, boxes turn green, percentages grow. But if what's being measured isn't the same as the goal, the numbers merely produce a systematic illusion. A support team can close more tickets, but if customers are coming back more often, speed isn't the solution. A store can attract more visitors, but if people are leaving without buying, traffic isn't success. An employee can complete more tasks, but if they're constantly having to correct the same mistakes, productivity is merely an illusion. Architects aren't against numbers. They're against numbers that provide definitive answers to the wrong questions, because measurement isn't neutral. Whatever you measure, you steer the system in that direction. If you measure only speed, people may sacrifice quality. If you measure only sales volume, trust may be lost. If you measure only closed cases, unresolved issues may remain invisible. A system becomes what it is measured by. That is why the architect defines the purpose first, not the metric. What reality should this action change? Whose life should it make a difference in? Which symptom should decrease? Which risk should not increase? How long will it take to see the result? Metrics established without answering these questions count actions, not the impact. People often view the result as a single moment. The payment went through, the message was answered, the system was launched, but some results emerge over time. A solution works today. A week later, it creates a new problem. An automation boosts speed on the first day. A month later, it turns into a dependency no one understands. A decision reduces costs in the short term. In the long term, it leads to a loss of trust. An architect doesn't just look at the result the moment it occurs, they also track the trail it leaves behind, because every solution can be the beginning of another system, and every improvement can create new debt within the wrong boundaries. That's why feedback isn't just an error message, it's the truth returning to the system. What did the person experience? What did the process produce? What was the difference between what was expected and what actually happened? Which assumption turned out to be incorrect? Which side effect went unnoticed? If the system cannot obtain these answers, it cannot learn. A system that cannot learn will simply repeat the same decision more quickly. For an architect, feedback is not criticism, it is directional information. A ship does not move forward by its engine alone. It must know where it is. A system too does not move forward by action alone. It must see where the action is taking it. That is why measurement is not a control tool. It is a mirror that reduces blindness, but if the mirror is turned in the wrong direction, the system watches not itself, but only the image it wants to see. An action is not considered complete until the echo returns, because the value of an action is revealed not in the moment it is performed, but in the effect it produces. And a system that does not perceive its impact begins to mistake its own noise for success. What a system measures determines what it will become over time, because people do not look only at goals, they also look at how those goals evaluate them. If a call center measures only talk time, employees will cut calls short. Whether the problem was solved, trust was maintained, or the customer had to call back, these factors may take a back seat. If a team measures only completed tasks, it will start choosing small and easy tasks. Difficult but important tasks remain unseen. This is the invisible impact of measurement. The metric itself does not issue commands, but it quietly guides behavior. The architect views every metric as a compass. If the compass is off, walking faster simply means reaching the wrong place sooner. The right metric isn't a single number. It's the revelation of a balance. As speed increases, what happens to quality? As costs decrease, what happens to trust? As the number of transactions rises, what happens to the error rate? If a system measures only profit, it cannot see where the loss is hidden. That is why the architect considers metrics across 3 layers. Action tells us what we're doing, impact tells us what we're changing, protection tells us what we're not disrupting while doing so. In a campaign, the number of impressions might be the action. The number of qualified leads is impact. Cost and loss of trust, however, fall under the protection category. When this distinction isn't made, the system tells a single success story. It silences the rest of the truth, but not everything can be measured. Human trust cannot be reduced to a single percentage. A customer's quiet departure may not result in a formal complaint. An architect does not ignore what is not quantified. They look at recurring questions, increasing feedback, users who fall silent, prolonged wait times, unexpected cancellations. These sometimes signal the truth before the metrics do. Because systems don't break with a loud crash, they produce small deviations first. Good architecture doesn't just catch major errors, it also notices when the direction is slowly shifting. That's why feedback isn't a one-time opinion, it's a continuous cycle. Action is taken, the result is observed, it's compared to what was expected, the difference is understood. If necessary, the decision is revised, then it's measured again. The architect doesn't place feedback at the end of the process, they embed it within the system, because lessons learned too late are often costly. An early warning, however, can correct the course with a small adjustment. A solution can be tested on 10 people before being applied to 1,000. An automation can be run in a limited scope before it changes the entire workflow. This is not timidity, it is controlled learning. The architect does not promise certainty, they limit the cost of uncertainty. However, feedback can also be misinterpreted. Just because one user complains doesn't mean the entire system is broken. Just because a number dropped doesn't mean the decision was wrong. Just because an improvement was observed doesn't mean the application was the cause. Other things may have changed at the same time, other conditions. That's why the architect doesn't just ask what happened, they also test why it happened, what was there before the change, what happened afterward, what other factors came into play, is the effect recurring? Measurement is not merely observation, it is about learning not to attribute the cause to the wrong thing. The human mind loves to construct narratives. It makes a change, it sees a result, it immediately links the two together. The architect, however, preserves the unseen possibilities in between. That's why some results require comparison with a previous period or a small controlled area. The goal isn't to turn everything into a laboratory. It's to reduce the likelihood of self-deception. A system doesn't learn if it only collects positive feedback. It merely reinforces itself. People report successes, they explain mistakes. The architect listens to both with equal attention, because failure shows where one thought incorrectly. Unexpected success, on the other hand, reveals which truth has not yet been understood. The system's task is not to defend itself, but to update its model. If a result differs from what was expected, the first step is not to look for someone to blame. The first step is to examine the assumptions. Which assumption turned out to be wrong? What data was missing? Which side effect was not taken into account? These questions make the system more honest, because a learning system does more than just keep records. It can question its own decisions. For the architect, feedback is not a tool for obedience. It is a right to correct. If reality has changed, the direction can change as well. But a change in direction should not be without a trace. It must be known why it changed, because of which result it changed, which threshold was crossed. That way the system doesn't veer off course randomly. It progresses by learning, and not every echo produces a new command. Some are simply monitored, some require a minor adjustment, others call for a rethinking of the architecture. True maturity does not lie in reacting to every signal. It lies in knowing which signal truly requires a change in direction. Just because a system hears an echo does not mean it must immediately yield to it, because not every signal carries the same weight. Some are merely a passing wave, some are the result of an erroneous measurement. Others, however, are the first signs of a change beginning deep within the structure. It tests the meaning of the signal. Where did it come from? How long did it last? How many times did it repeat? What outcome did it affect? Intervention without answering these questions transforms the system into a structure that is frightened rather than one that learns. A compass that changes direction with every vibration does not provide guidance. The feedback loop must have a rhythm. Some outcomes are immediate, others become apparent over time. Whether a message has been received can be determined within seconds. Regaining a customer's trust can take weeks. The architect establishes the criteria based on the nature of the outcome, because a premature judgment can be just as misleading as a belated one. A system must first state what it aims to achieve, then which indicators signal progress toward that goal, which ones are merely movement, and which thresholds, if crossed, signal that progress begins to cause harm. Thus, success is not tied to a single number. Key outcome, supporting indicators, protective limits. The architect does not merely measure the desired response, they also build the possibility of error into the measurement. If automation reduces time but makes the system harder to understand, the gain has created a liability. If a support process closes requests but the same problem keeps coming back, the system is merely clearing the backlog, not the problem itself. This is where the role of feedback comes into play. It does not leave the action in the past. It brings the result back to the beginning. It re-examines the assumption on which the decision was based. If necessary, it changes the metric. If necessary, the process. If necessary, the initial decision. A system capable of correcting its own errors is stronger than a system that tries to appear flawless. But feedback must also have an owner. Who will monitor it? Who will interpret it? At what threshold will intervention occur? Who will decide on a change of course? If these questions remain unanswered, data accumulates and the measurement turns into a new invisible queue. The architect does not leave the data to its own devices. He ties it to a decision point. If the expected result is achieved, the process continues. If the deviation is small, it is monitored. If the limit is exceeded, intervention occurs. If the impact is unknown, a controlled test is conducted. If the result is harmful, a path for reversal is opened. Thus, the system does not merely observe, it also knows what to do based on what it sees. However, not every piece of feedback should result in automatic action. Some signals require human interpretation. A number may drop. Behind it could be a seasonal change, a market shift, or a change in behavior. A customer may give a negative response. The problem may not be in the entire system, but at a single touch point. The architect provides the machine with feedback loops. The architect keeps the context in human hands, because measurement simplifies reality. Sometimes it oversimplifies. Good architecture does not replace the human with a number. It shows the human where to look. The final step for a learning system is to convert what it has learned into memory. What change was made, what was expected, what actually happened, what signal caused the change in direction. If this record is not kept, the system relives its past, it repeats the same experiments, it produces the same errors under different names. The architect records not only the results, but also how the thinking changed, because without memory, feedback is merely a reaction. With memory, it becomes organizational learning. You don't have to rebuild the entire measurement system today. Choose a single change you've implemented, then write down these questions. What was this change supposed to fix? What was the actual outcome? Which metric merely shows movement? Which indicator shows the real impact? What do we need to preserve? At what threshold should we change course? When these answers become visible, the system hears its own voice for the first time. In log 017, we made the lost requests visible. In log 018, we identified the source of the truth. In log 019, we identified the decision maker. In log 020, we turned the decision into action. In log 021, we learned to listen to what the action actually changed. Now the system isn't just functioning, it observes itself. When it makes a mistake, it corrects itself. When it's right, it learns why it's right. In this log, I didn't just show you a system without feedback. I also left you with the cycle where action leads to results, results lead to knowledge, and knowledge leads to better decisions. You can see more closely on synthlog.tech how the architect views systems, interprets measurements, and builds structures that learn from results. I am the architect. We'll meet again in the next recording. When that day comes, you'll understand why these recordings exist. System status, active, protocol, 0.1, complete, next protocol, and 2, status, active.